Okay, let's take a look at exam 1, which is all about declaration. So declaration is when we want to use a variable, we first have to tell our compiler what we're going to name that variable and what data type that variable is. And so then after we create a name for it, we can start referring to it by name, and the compiler knows what we're talking about throughout the program. So the way that we declare is we often start with an access type such as public or private, but if it's within a method, often we don't even have to bother with an access type because they're all going to be local variables, they're all going to be private. But in this question number 1, how would you declare a field? That means that a field is a type of variable that is pretty much available throughout the entire class. How would you declare a field that is an integer and called intelligence and is publicly accessible? So in that case, we're going to start with the access type, which is public, and what that means is that all the other code in your program can go in and access that variable. If we made it private, then the other code could not access that variable. And we try to make things public and private depending on how modular we want to make the program. Okay, so we want to make this intelligence publicly accessible, so now it's publicly accessible. It's an integer, so it's going to be int as the data type, and then we're going to put the identifier intelligence, and then a semicolon, public int intelligence. So this is how we declare an integer called intelligence and make it publicly accessible. Number 2, how would you declare a field that would represent a fraction such as temperature? Make the field publicly accessible. So it's going to be the same thing. The only difference is instead of having an int data type, we're going to have a fraction data type. And there's 2 fraction data types in Java. There's float and there's double. I almost always use double. And then we're going to put the name of the identifier, which is temperature, and a semicolon. So there's our how we declare a variable that is a double called temperature. How would you declare a publicly accessible field called character name that will hold a string of characters? So if we want to hold a string of characters, we're going to use the string data type, and we'll put public and string. And the key here is that whenever we use the string, that is not a primitive data type, that is an object, and so it's going to be capital S. And then character name. So that's how we declare a string called character name, and there's a semicolon at the end. Question number 4, how would you declare a publicly accessible field that represents an array of integers called the integers? So an array of integers is when you have a whole bunch of integers with the same name, a big stack of them. And the way we declare that, public int, but here's where it's different. If it's an array, we put some square brackets at the end. So int, and then this open closing square brackets, a space, and then the integers, and a semicolon. So that's how we declare an array of integers called the integers, make it public. Question number 5, how would you declare a publicly accessible field of an object type random called random1? So now we're going to actually declare an object, and it's very simple. It's going to be public again. And here we give it the data type, which in this case is random class, not string, not integer, just random class. And we give it our identifier, random1, and then a semicolon. So that's how we declare an object. Just give it the class and what we want to call it. Question number 6, how would you declare a publicly accessible array of objects of the type cat called mycats? Okay, so we're going to create an array of cats. We put public, and then cat is the name of the class that we want to make an array of. Then we're going to put the opening and closing brackets to show that it is an array, and the identifier, mycats. Pretty easy. Question number 7, there are 8 primitive blank in Java. 5 of these represent numerical types of varying range and precision, double float, int, long and short. The remaining 3 are used to represent single bit values, Boolean, single byte values, and 2-byte characters from the ISO Unicode character set char. What are these called? That should say, what are these called? These are called data types. So we've got 8 primitive data types that match this description. 8. A programmer defined named for a variable, method, class, or interface. So whenever we want to create our own method or create our own variables, we're going to give it an identifier. This is a fancy way of saying name. And we can pretty much choose whatever identifiers we want to, as long as we follow certain rules. Number 9. The default value of any variable not explicitly initialized when it is declared. Fields of numeric primitive types have the value of 0 by default. Boolean variables have the value of false. Char variables, which is character values, have the value of \u000, that's the null character. And object references have the value of null. The initial value of local variables are undefined, unless explicitly initialized. This passage describes, so we're talking about default values. So whenever you create a variable, so long as it's not within a method and it's what we call a local variable, that variable will have a default value, and it's usually set to 0 or empty or null. 10. A variable defined inside of a method body. So if we have a method body, and so here I've taken a look at my program here, I could create a method. I could call it public void check HP or something like that. And so here I've got a method. If I create some variables in here, I don't have to use the public keyword. I can just say int age, and I can declare all the variables I want. String name. These variables here are what we call local variables. When the method is called, so when checkHP is called, it's going to create these variables, and at the end of the method, these variables are all going to die. So these variables are temporary variables that last only the life of the method. And those are local variables. Question number 11. Java's 8 standard non-class types, Boolean, byte, char, double float, int, long, and short, these are called primitive types. Primitive means that it cannot be broken down into anything simpler. So those are as simple as it gets, and they're called primitive types. Okay, that's the declaration test. Good luck on it.